most of the character traits that are truly advantageous for effective leadership are predominantly found in those who fail to impress others about their talent for management. This is especially true for women. I found that fascinating and kind of counterintuitive. You know, it's not just about having the traits of a successful leader. It's actually also about persuading others that this is the case. And in fact, this article concludes that with research that, you know, that women are more likely to adopt more effective leadership strategies, but they're not necessarily recognised or respected for that. I think this is my last article. There's been so many articles on women at the moment in the media. It's been fascinating. There's another one in the paper today, but this was an article from February the 12th, just the other day, not on our industry, but focusing on the lack of women as influential voices in the media, and it particularly focused on the lack of female representation on the ABC TV program Q&A. It starts off by focusing on voice, about how women are perceived in comparison to men, so shrill, childish, high-pitched, Hillary Clinton being told her voice was grating and annoying, and this recommendation, want to lead like a boss, speak like a man, and by that I mean literally speak like a man. Something to reflect on. The article again, however, raises a similar issue to the previous article, which is that of confidence and reluctance to step up. And again, I bolded a couple of sentences in that second paragraph where Margaret went to the Globe Mail, who was commenting, men just assume they have mastery even when they don't. Men have more confidence and are more willing to take risks. They don't worry that they might look like idiots. And she actually states that women do worry about looking like idiots. And it's this confidence versus competence dilemma that I think is one of the key points that I'd like to take out for today in this webinar. So, is there a female brand of leadership? Yeah, there do seem to be differences in how women lead versus how men lead. Some research concludes this can be more effective, however, that it may not be as valued as such. So is it a matter of becoming more like a man, speaking like a man, behaving like a man? Or is it a matter of trying to change the perceptions of what is important in a leader? Or is it a matter of attempting to change specific gender-based behaviour patterns that might possibly be holding women back? I would argue, after 30-odd years in an industry that is actually quite dominated by women, not necessarily in leadership roles, but I would argue that in fact there are that little value, which is maybe not the point of this webinar, but little value in debating the relative merits of female versus male leadership. I think that I would focus instead on the importance of having a strong personal brand. Now, what do I mean by a personal brand? And I'd like to ask you to reflect on this yourself about whether you have a strong personal brand. Can you articulate what you stand for? What are your values? And does your behaviour, how you behave, does it embody those beliefs and values? You know, that term authenticity, which is used a lot in discussions of leadership, but are you authentic in your relationships and your dealings with other people? And then that question of consistency. Do you demonstrate a degree of consistency in your behaviour so that other people know what to expect of you? So if two different people are talking about you, would they have a common understanding of who you are? So what advice would I give to those wanting to maximise their opportunities in leadership roles? I'll try and draw some conclusions and maybe make some personal reflections as well. So going back to Wendy Harmer at the beginning, I suppose my first tip or conversation starter is be sure you want to. Be sure you're making an active choice in stepping up for things, choosing a career path, what you want to do. Personally, I think right from the days when I was at school, I could never resist trying to make my voice heard in whatever decision making was going on around me. I suppose I always thought I had something to contribute, and I wanted to contribute. So it was a very active choice that I made to step up, to take on opportunities, to say yes to things rather than saying no to things. Second point, I think, goes back to one of the articles I referenced earlier, which is, don't believe you have to be extraordinary. Have confidence in what you can do and how you compare with others. And I think throughout my career, this has probably been my personal biggest issue. I think I've been very fortunate to work within organisations and with people who saw my potential probably better than I did and encouraged me to step up for things that I might not have considered. This thinking of someone else will do a better job, I'm not as good as other people. Don't believe you have to be extraordinary will be one of my key messages, I think. The third dot point, invest in building both capability and confidence. And again, going back to some of the articles that I referenced earlier, don't underestimate the importance of ongoing both professional and personal development. It's not just about being good at your job in terms of particular competence or skill set or qualifications, experience. It is you as an individual, and it does come back to that sort of personal aspect of the role and your personal brand issue. And investing in your own development is a huge part of that. Take the time to do that. The fourth dot point, focus on your strengths, not your weaknesses. I suppose it's similar to the extraordinary comment, but don't dwell on what you can't do. Focus on what you can do. It's easier sometimes for us to think, well, why would they choose me rather than, well, why wouldn't they choose me? And the final point, and I think this will be a big topic for a future webinar, is this one about role models and mentors. Both from inside our industry, but not just in ELT, outside as well. And not just people you know to talk to, but people you may never have met, you may never meet, but that you would like to emulate. Again, I was fortunate enough to have a great mentor and was always very conscious of some great female leaders that this industry has and has had in the past. And thinking if they could achieve what they did, then so could I. So that's my 20 minutes, but a little bit short, which gives us more time for questions, which is great. So I might, Aparna, hand back to you so that you can hand over to Dawn.
Sue, thank you so much. That's really got us thinking now about a few questions, and I can see the questions coming up already. Just as a reminder to our audience, this session is being recorded, so if you have lost sound, please do not panic. I will make the recording available. And once again, please type in your questions as we go. If anything our expert presenters say triggered questions or comments from you, I will be passing them on to them at the end of the session. Dawn, I will now hand over the controls to you.
Okay.
So there you go, Dawn.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Aparna, and thank you, Sue. Hello, and thank you for the invitation to be a part of this webinar. I really look forward to the upcoming discussion following this because I think there are some points that Sue touched on that I'm probably going to repeat, but for obvious and good reason, I think. So, before I kick off, I'm not sure if it's... there we are. Okay. Sorry, technical difficulties at my end. Before I kick off, I thought it would be useful just to tell you a little bit about me. Given that my topic really revolves around the work-life balance piece, it's probably important to know who I am. So as Aparna has already mentioned, I work at RMIT. I lead the international relations team. I'm 40 years young and married. I've been working in the sector since my first role as a casual staff member at Monash University as a student in the International Exchange Office when I was still a student, and my immediate family lives overseas. I mention this because my profile, if you will, would probably bring people to presume that because my life doesn't look to be busy with a whole army of children or personal family events, etc., that I shouldn't or don't have the issues that all around having that work-life balance. But in fact, I haven't and still find the work-life balancing act challenging. And I'm here today to share some of my personal insights on how I approach some of these challenges in my life. And hopefully you might find some takeaways that you can apply within your own personal context. That's just a visual of all of the things I just said. So, like anything, I must make a disclaimer. Unlike Sue, who has an amazing track record, I'm still working on mine. And I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm still working it out. And which I think I may have alluded to already, but that is, I do see myself as someone that likes to make the most of my days and get my hands into quite a few projects. So this notion of balance is something that I definitely grapple with. So today I wanted to first take a look at how the concept of work-life balance is being perceived at a macro level, and particularly in Australia. Secondly, I wanted to share my thoughts around how we actually perceive and express the phrase as we all know it, and should we be taking a different angle on our interpretation of this. Then the section that I do hope you find useful, which is around the how. We can all identify with the juggling act, but how can we find the tools and make the changes to our behavior to improve this for ourselves? And finally, I'm hoping that you're able to have at least one takeaway that you can run home with post this webinar. So, what does the average Australian professional think about this concept of work-life balance? Hudson recently released a quantitative report with hiring managers and employees across Australia to analyze the talent landscape and provide insights on what employers might expect in 2016. For those of you that don't know, Hudson is a global talent solutions company with expertise in leadership and specialized recruitment process outsourcing, talent management, and contracting solutions. They carry out their work in the Americas and the Asia Pacific. And I credit much of this presentation to their recent report because I found their insights to this topic really interesting. So here we go. As you can see from this first slide, the absolute top attribute that professionals are looking for in a new role in 2016 is exactly that, work-life balance. This represents the entire sample pool, men and women, and each of their qualified demographics, which will be broken down later. This actually trumps salary. I think that's quite interesting and telling. You can also see how this sample perceived what is meant by the whole concept of work-life balance as well. So we are absolutely clear on what the definition is. Waiting for my next one. There we go. So now we know they value it, so the Australian professional community, but why? And I'm taking a stab that we can all relate to these two main points. And truth be told, I didn't write this PowerPoint in the standard 9 to 5, so working at night or before the working day, I think many of us share. But we can see that this is becoming much more of an essential aspect of the Australian professionals' mix in what's important to them. So looking at some of the drivers for how we think and things that we want in the workplace. And this is more, this is about the push factor. So the why you might leave your role reasons. Interestingly, work-life balance comes in at number 4, perhaps because the first 2 reasons may indicate that the majority of the respondents have been in their roles for quite a while, and so although they may be juggling a lot, they are well versed in their individual roles and may have simply hit a stalemate in their role and or organization. It's hard to say, but I think that when you're in an organization for a while and you've definitely decided that you went out. There's not much interest there. The pull factor. So, however, when we look at the pull factor, the why you would want a particular role, so the forward-thinking piece, work-life balance moves up to number 2 and just under salary. This indicates to me that for most of us, we have expectations around what the next best thing will bring for us. We'll be well paid, we'll have a great cultural fit, and probably not so concerned about career progression because we have exceptional work-life balance. So if we break this down a bit and look at the push factor by demographic, it does reveal a bit about the people currently in our workforce. So that's designated by Gen Y, Gen X, and the baby boomers. So you can see each of their columns. I won't read these line by line, but as you can see, the same reasons exist by their order of importance, but their order of importance varies. It's also really interesting to note that if we split the sample evenly by gender, there's really very little difference in preference there off to the left-hand side of that slide. So at least from this data anyway, our perspectives and expectations are directly related to where we are in our professional careers. So not so much about gender, going back to even the point that Sue made earlier, that some of these concepts that we're discussing don't necessarily relate to the factor of gender. And again, if we're looking at the pull factor by demographic, we can also see the same reasons also appearing, but they all carry a different weighting depending on the age group. So interestingly, this is where we see a difference in preference also between the male and females, with that work-life balance being more important to the female respondents than to the male respondents. In fact, there's quite a few variations on their preferences of the attributes on the left-hand side, as you can see. So, what about the money? I think we all agree that money is not all that drives us. And according to the Hudson report, 32% of the respondents would rather have work-life balance than a pay rise. It is trumped by increased annual leave, which in my mind complements the whole notion of work-life balance anyway. And bonuses may imply that individuals would prefer to be rewarded based on individually based targets and specific objectives, which may perhaps provide that ability for the individual to exit the board in meeting a new challenge stage, or feel that they're also, or that they aren't achieving the career progression that they would like. All in all, I find this this slide quite interesting, and I think it's all the things that we probably know, but having the stats is, I think, quite revealing. So now that we have reviewed the current state of play and the thinking of the Australian professionals around the concept of work-life balance, I'm going to ask you to think about it in a different light, and that is really to think about it in terms of work-life effectiveness. As Elaine's quote suggests, we can never have all that we do equally balanced, but I think what we can do is be more effective in how we can manage our days. It's a really, really simple variation, but one that I think is really important to note. And if you're one of my staff members, everything I say is about efficiency and how can we do that better and smarter and leaner. So, so that word really resonates a bit better with me. So I've thought about how I approach my effectiveness and mentally break this down into 3 sections. With the first being that I really need to have a plan. I'm an absolute planner. No matter what, I need to have whatever my life is at any point in time, a roadmap for how I'm going to carry anything out. So in this plan, I don't necessarily write a list and work my way through it, but I do mentally work my way through what I need to prioritize. And sometimes when I do that, it means that I need to forego something else, whether it's walking away from a specific opportunity choosing what to focus on, or sometimes it's as simple as sacrificing sleep. With any project that I commence, I also, and for anyone for that matter, you would map out what steps you need to take to make the project work, but you always would determine what it will take for the project to be considered successful. And that is exactly what I do. I determine that my week will be successful if I, for instance, finish that report for the DVCI, do 3 runs of at least 5K each, so that I'm keeping on top of my fitness regime, and that I don't have any departures from the office any later than 6 p.m. The list can go on, but by doing this, I can give myself small goals to work towards that are achievable and meaningful. And this leads me to my next 2 points, being deliberate and realistic. For me, I feel as though there's no sense in setting myself up to fail by overloading in this massive list that I allocate to myself. Excuse me, but at the same time, I also think it's important to be deliberate in the planning. And finally, I build a framework to support this plan, because I know that I want to complete my 3 runs this week, for instance. I cannot build a framework that doesn't allow for that. I need to ensure that I realistically think through all of this and when it will happen. And if it doesn't happen, what do I do? Do I beat myself up for it? Or how do I intend to make up for it? So the next slide really carries over from my last point, which is about this framework. And I just called it today the working framework. I guess that's how I mentally think about it. And it's about trying to set myself up for success. I also think through, how I can be more effective. So some of these are more around the strategies that I enable to help myself. And the first one is really about setting boundaries. And I think with all of these I'm about to talk about, I still have a lot of work to do, but I think that they've really helped to provide a framework for myself. And we hear it all the time, but it is so important. So for instance, if you're on leave but you still reply to emails, when you're creating your own rod for your back, because now there's that expectation amongst your colleagues that you'll always be on your emails or on your phone, regardless of where or what you might be meant to be doing. And I was so guilty of this for so many years. But in the end, I really worked out that that doesn't do anyone any good. It was as if I was frustrated by my working 24/7, but I was really enabling this type of behavior myself. The second one is one of my favorites, and it's one-time handling. And I'm sure many of you know this concept and are aware of it and probably do it yourselves, but this is one that I really like. And it's based on the premise that when you pick up a project, task, or anything, you either determine a specific time for when you will actually handle this project and finalize it, or you address it right then and there. So if you're one of those people like me that opens an email that's a little bit tricky, start it, then it's in a draft, and then 2 days later, then another 2 days later, and it's about 5 days later you haven't sent the email because it's a tricky, complicated email, that's not applying the one-time handling notion. And those are the things just with a simple email that you can really change, and you can just force yourself. And that's something that I apply a lot. Mentoring and networking, I almost think that they are one and the same, and Sue's mentioned these, and I find these absolutely paramount, not only to leadership, but also being able to effectively prioritize your time. And I completely appreciate that this isn't a notion that you attach to work-life balance. But when you only have so many hours in the day, and you need to think about what and where you focus your energy, it's really, in my mind, a good thing to think about in terms of aligning yourself with activities and individuals and people that you can learn from and you can give back to as well. But the notion of the whole of mentoring doesn't have to take on a formal agreement. And in fact, I've never outright said to any of my mentors, "Can I be your mentee?" But I know a lot of people do that. But I've been really, in my own professional life, I feel as though I've been really proactive in either connecting with individuals that have inspired me, those that are in roles that I aspire to be doing one day, or aspects of their role, and whether it's informally or not, I would try to connect with them. And sometimes it takes a lot of guts to walk up to a president of an organization or otherwise at a conference, but I learned so much from, and continue to learn so much from these individuals that share their time. So I really think networking is key, and it goes back to the confidence piece. Just get out there and do it. My last section in how I think about work-life effectiveness is really about looking after your health and well-being. And we hear it all the time, and I think we all have good intentions in this space. And I'm not sure how many of you have gone through periods of time, I know I have, where things have been quite stressful, and the thing I'm looking forward to the most is having my glass of red wine when I get home. And sometimes that can get into a week or two of bad habits. But we all know that we perform our best, we think our best whenever we look after ourselves. So really being looking after ourselves both in mind and body, and not being beating ourselves up. Building on your strengths and don't fight your weaknesses. Again, another point that Sue mentioned. I think it's not said enough, and we can't be good at everything, is what I say to many of my staff, because we all have a unique set of skills, and we want to be able to build and hone those skills. So it's better to focus on the strengths, and I try to remind myself of that as well. Focus on solutions. Again, this sounds like a crazy, maybe not crazy, but doesn't really fit into this section. But I think it's about repositioning how one thinks. And I guess instead of feeling overwhelmed, the perspective at least I try to take is, well, how can I solve this? What's the workaround? What do I need to give up to get this? And so on and so forth. So I think it's always trying to be a solutions-based individual. And my final point on this is creating a positive default. And what I mean by that is when something doesn't go well or you're frustrated, for myself, I'm always thinking back to something that I can grab onto that's going to be my positive default. So it might be as really fundamental as, I'm healthy and I'm living in a free country. It can be that dire, or it can be the weekend is coming up, but I'm always defaulting back to trying to think of, I suppose a lot of the literature at the moment and messaging at the moment is around gratefulness, but whether you want to look at it in that way or not, but I always try to think of, even if I can't get it right, what are the good bits that I should be looking at? And ultimately, I think one point that I think we should all take on board is we don't have to do it all. So thank you for listening.
Dawn, thank you so much for that. We've had so many questions come in, and you're right, you covered a lot of the points that Sue introduced. And interestingly, all of the comments we've received and the questions we've received are things that both you and Sue have identified as key issues. So I might start at the beginning. So Sue and Dawn, because of the overlap in the topics, please feel free to jump in and add to each other's responses. The first question is to do with the imbalance in the industry, and I'll just read out the question to you. Do you feel that the issues regarding the imbalance of female leadership is reflected in an industry that is female-dominated like ours? I'll just repeat that. Are the issues regarding the imbalance of female leadership reflected in an industry that is female dominated like ours? Are the issues we face different? Sue?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one that I was just sort of thinking about, before I sort of opened my mouth and spoke. But
Sorry.
It's a very good question. That our industry is the teaching industry, and as such, our teaching ranks, our staff ranks, are dominated by women. In terms of, I'm not sure what the actual proportions are. I don't even know if any research has been done into the ELT industry in this, but. And I don't even know factually what the proportions of men in management position versus women are. I think there are a lot of women in leadership positions, but I don't think the proportions are as high as they should be. But I think there are complicated reasons for why that is the case. And I think work-life balance is part of that, coming back to some of the things that Dawn was saying. Career progression or job progression, work-life balance, everyone makes different choices in that area. For some people, say, a bigger salary is more important. For some people, actually, the culture fit. And I was just reflecting on my job decisions. Sometimes having a good boss and finding a good culture fit between yourself and the organisation actually leads to a more satisfying job than going for a higher level job where you're going to get paid more and get more status or whatever, but in fact you get not the same job satisfaction from it at a particular point in your career. So I actually think it's a complicated question that has complicated answers, and I don't think I necessarily have those answers.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Dawn, do you have anything to add to that? Within the larger international education space, and not specifically ELICOS, are some of the issues similar, you think?
I still think in international education there seems to be, but it's changing since I've been in this area, is the imbalance, gender imbalance. There's certainly been more females, but that's again changing. I do think that overall there are the issues we face different. Sorry, I'm to keep reading that because it is complicated. I think because there are more women, in my experience, have also been more women in leadership roles. So maybe some of the issues that would face organizations, maybe corporates, would be slightly different because they do, on a whole, have a greater gender imbalance. But I just think, yeah, it's a complicated one, and I don't think I'm probably qualified to respond to that.
I think some of the questions I'm also getting are to do with the visibility of women, but then it decreases as we go higher. For example, I now have a question. How can I convince my manager to allow me to expand and develop? He's happy with me doing my current job, and I feel that he isn't concerned with my career development. Yesterday, I was at another session, a meeting for academic managers, and this question came up repeatedly from women. Who would like to tackle this one?
I'm happy to start on this one because I think it goes back to something I was saying in response to the first question, which is it's really important to find a good work environment that allows you to grow and develop and progress. And that might be a reason for changing jobs. And say you might have to, take a salary cut to go to an organisation where you're going to get more opportunities in the long term. Because having, a good boss, an organisation where the values of investing in their staff, you have a boss who understands that you want to grow and develop, that is, you can't put a value on that. So to me, if I was asking those questions about my boss, you're never going to change your boss in terms of their behaviour. You've got to change your boss in terms of getting a different boss, I think.
Yep.
And I might just chime in there as well, because I think that that's a really interesting question, in that I am constantly reminding my staff that I want them to look at where they see themselves going. So the person that posed that question, I would be saying, where do you want to be? I know this, elusive question of where do you want to be in 5 and 10 years, but more specific. So what area of expertise do you want to carve out for yourself in your career? So I'll give you an example. I have a staff member who works in student mobility, but was wanting to progress, and I said, it seems as though you have an interest in critical incident response planning, and that you really enjoy that. Do you think that that's something that you want to start building your expertise in? And so all of those professional development opportunities are mutually beneficial then as well. So I'd be saying also to be wary of looking at, not wary, but being proactive in looking at projects and opportunities that are mutually beneficial, and both within your role and for yourself. And sometimes that's not possible, but when it is, I think that that's a really good way of looking at it.
Thank you, Dawn. We have a lot of questions about mentors and finding mentors. And Dawn, thank you for spending some time talking about finding mentors. Questions still remain on how to approach and identify a mentor externally. Any other ideas on how people could actually approach a mentor when the process is not so organic?
I think Dawn made a really good point about, formal mentoring, can sometimes put constraints around things that are not necessary. And in fact, the more mentors you have in some ways, the better, because they can mentor, they can offer experience and insights into a whole range of different areas. And her point about networking was, I thought, key. The more people, the more other women, other leaders, other managers that you talk to and gain insights from. If you find out that someone says, oh, so-and-so is really good at this, go and talk to them about it. Just don't be shy, I think, and don't look for formal mentoring relationships necessarily, but just look for people that you can learn from and gain insights from that can help shape you in all different directions.
Thank you, Sue. Dawn, here's a question for you, directly linked to responding to emails. How do others in your organization react to your boundaries? Example, not answering the work phone or email after 6 p.m. and before 8 a.m.
That's a good question, and the answer is not absolutely clear cut. But I guess that example was more to illustrate that if I was on leave, that I was never going. I never go on leave unless somebody has been nominated to act in my role. So in theory, what I may be emailed about or called about should already be taken care of by that individual. Pardon me. But one of the things that I do say to new staff, because I do a lot of emails on, I'm very guilty, I'm airing a bad habit here, but I do a lot of emails on a weekend, but just for like an hour, just to get myself caught up, and then I'd leave them all in the drafts. But I used to send them off, and what I realized was that my staff may have had an expectation that they should also be accessible and responding to emails on the weekend as well. And I realized that was happening, and I actually didn't work that out from me doing it, but I worked it out because my manager was doing it, and then I realized I was just shadowing that. So boundaries, I think it is really good to set the culture within your work environment, and I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with being upfront and clear with your manager to say, just want to be clear on what your expectations are of me around X, Y, Z. And it could be as simple as, just so you know, I hope you're not expecting, or, do you expect me to be responding to emails over the weekend, or things like that, if your work environment is that fast-paced and it involves students that might have after-hours needs, because that was the whole history of my professional career, has been student mobility, and they don't have standard working hours. So I just think it's having a really honest conversation, whether it's with your manager and also your staff, to say, this is what I expect. You know, if this isn't sitting well with you, talk to me and let's make something work.
That's a really good point, Dawn. And I think this goes back to something Sue said about how we are. She didn't use the term underconfident, but I think there is a collective underconfidence, and women compensate by overperforming in their roles. And I do think the email situation and going above and beyond has very much to do with that. So, Sue, here's a question. Could you please expand a bit on your idea of personal brand? A lot of people have liked this concept and would like to hear a bit more about it.
Yeah, no, it's something that is very dear to my heart, I suppose, in terms of, you know, when people, I suppose I've had a long career and I have reached, you know, a certain point where I've achieved a lot of things, and a lot of people have sort of asked me that question, how did you get there? How did you, you know, to do that? And one thing that I, you know, if I look back at all my past, I suppose one of the things that the feedback that I've had from other people is that they know what to expect from me. They know how I will react to things. They know how I will behave in certain situations. That it doesn't matter what the situation is. I will I will evidence a certain behaviour pattern that they can rely on, that they can be confident in being able to predict in some ways. And in some ways it sounds a bit boring, a bit safe, but it means that people go to you with things because they know how you're going to deal with them. There's a degree of confidence that gives them in you, in your ability to deliver, is if you can actually demonstrate that sort of consistent way of dealing with things that becomes, I think, your personal brand. It's not just behaviour, but it does come down to values, your beliefs, what priorities you will place on things based on those beliefs and those values, and people start to develop a trust and a reliance in your behaviour that gives them confidence in working with you.
Thank you, Sue. That makes a lot of sense. Now, here's a controversial question to both of you. Many female friends and colleagues have said that sometimes senior women haven't supported more junior female members. In fact, the opposite is true. And I've heard this in the context of mentors as well. Do either of you have a view on this?
Well, I mean, really sad if that is the case in many ways. I think if you find women that behave in that way, you just stay clear of them and move on to women who are going to be supportive and who are going to build that collegial network with you. You know, and again, I'd like to come back to something Dawn said, which was about, you know, the positives. Don't focus on the negative people. Focus on the positive people. Find someone who will help you, who will support you.
And I wonder if there might be maybe a misunderstanding of what that is as well. So not feeling supported, I would be also interested in why and how, because maybe that's how it's been perceived by the person wanting to connect with that more senior leader. It could be, you know, that again, it's they haven't reached out to me when really you probably need to reach out to them. I'm not sure, but that's one possibility. But I agree with Sue. I think the people that I would want to align with would be people that are responsive, that do invest in others. And I didn't really had it as a note, but didn't really emphasize it in the whole mentoring space. You don't have to be extraordinary, as Sue mentioned in her presentation. And not to talk about myself, but I use myself as an example in trying to explain my point. And that when I started doing this, I think it was 2 years ago, I had a conversation, myself and another colleague, with young women in the field, and they said, how did you get to your positions? Not that we're in senior roles, but, you know, management roles. How did you get there? We're not quite sure how to do it. We don't feel that we're really being supported. And then we thought we should pull together some sort of workshop or network for women to be able to, informally be mentored or learn more about this and have a forum to discuss. And so that's what I did. And myself and a colleague pulled together this session. It was supposed to be 25 people. We had over 200 people show up. And it was a workshop for people to discuss these sorts of topics. And then people started tapping me on the shoulder saying, oh, let's do another one, and let's do another one. Now, I've got plenty of a career ahead of me, and I was purely somebody that was I wasn't doing anything extraordinary except connecting people. And I think that that's the thing. You don't necessarily have to rely on that individual, but go out and do it yourself. And if that's not the right person, they'll be a better fit somewhere else.
That's great, Dawn, because that leads me to the next question, and possibly the last question for today. Is there officially mentoring networks that we can plug into for women leaders, female leaders in international education or ELT?
I'm not sure about ELT. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I'm... Sue, were you going to comment?
Okay.
No, I'm sure, Dawn, you know of some within the broader international education space. There haven't been any to date, as far as I'm aware, in ELT, apart from the English Australia speed mentoring sessions at the last two English Australia conferences, which I suppose have been putting a toe in the water of trying to establish whether there is a need, a demand from the industry for something like that, and maybe those speed mentoring sessions provide a platform, a partner for English Australia to do something that might come out of this, this project.
It's definitely on our agenda. We're just trying to gauge the demand for it, and clearly there is a demand for it, and then work out how we can set up a mentorship or a network for women. Thank you, everyone. Now, as you know, with the survey, we were trying to gather information on, thanks, Cherie. Thank you for letting us know. We're trying to gather information on the kind of topics that you're interested in and the kind of questions you need answered, and also needs like a mentorship framework or putting you in touch with other female leaders who can help and support. Thank you so much. This was our first session. We look forward to many more sessions like this. And Sue and Dawn, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us on these issues. And thanks everybody for attending. I'm so glad 55 of you signed up for this and most of you showed up for it. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.